Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle, and today we're in for a treat. We're going to be working on a Daiwa Regal bait feeder. It's one of the reels that's often requested in my shop, and I just haven't had the opportunity to bring these things through. This one is the Regal 4000 BRI bait feeder, and its twin is actually the Regal 3500. So a couple of things before we get started. One, this is going to be a long video. Just takes a long time to service this. I always recommend that you pull the schematic. This schematic was available at mikesreelrepair.com. It's a Canadian company, but they have a lot of schematics for a lot of reels, so I would recommend that you go there. And you'll see in a schematic that the Regal 3500 and 4000 BRI series are identical. The difference being that the spool has a larger capacity on the 4000 reel. So we're going to take you through this, and it is going to take time. There's 4 basic elements that we're going to cover. The first one is how to take this reel apart. There's a lot of things going on here. The second, we'll do the low end service, which is the rear drag, which controls the rotor during bait feed mode. The next is we'll deal with the main drag and the gearing inside the reel. We'll come up top and we'll service the anti-reverse and the bearing that's underneath the rotor. And finally we'll do the drag service on the top end and the spools. So let's get started, and we do that by taking this reel apart. Now before we get going, some things you need to know. You're going to need a micro screwdriver. If you don't have one, stop right now and go get one, because you can't start the disassembly of the reel without this micro screwdriver. And quite honestly, you're going to feel like you're a jeweler as you work with those screws. They're very small. The second thing is I always wear protection on my hand, and I always recommend a parts tray. And in this case, because there's so many moving pieces and parts, I'm going to recommend 2 parts trays as we work through the reel. So I'm going to start by taking some of the exterior pieces off. The first one we're going to take off is going to be the handle assembly, and I'm going to have a long time with this because if I'm having trouble with this first nut, we're going to have a lot going on over the course of this this video. And be careful with this. It's a plastic cap. And that by itself is telling me this reel hasn't been serviced in a while, because there's it's very difficult to turn this button. Wow. And I don't want to shatter this button. So I'm using a little bit of a channel lock pliers here, grabbing it ever so lightly, and we're just hoping that we can get this thing out. So what's probably happened is this is a steel shaft. It's probably gotten the saltwater spray in here, or even at that advanced side of it, it's tough. And it's probably just rusted into the thread hole on the handle there. These are the types of problems you can expect, and these are the things that the reason why I have so many tools in front of me. It's just that you never know when you're going to need what. So we finally seem to have gotten that handle screw out of there, or mostly out of there. Just a little piece to go here. And we're going to put that up in the top bucket. We should be able to pull this side through then, and we have. That goes into the bucket. I'm going to take the top end off here with the drag. We release the drag tension knob, and we can pull the spool off. And then there's a retaining washer and the click mechanism. We pull these off just like that, and then we're going to go and take the rotor off. To take the rotor off, here's that first of those small screws that holds the nut. In this section I actually put into the other parts bucket. I leave my big pieces up top there, and then the smaller ones, and you can see the size of that screw and weight, they get better. They're even going to be smaller than that. I like to put those into the other tray. With that off, we can then remove the rotor nut. There we go. And usually that cap, it's a cap nut, you can't go too far with it. And usually the last one is a tight one. Notice as well, as we take this off, that there is a spring on the shaft that goes inside the pinion gear and is underneath the nut cap. So one of the recommendations I make, as always, is take pictures along the way so that you know the sequence that these pieces and parts have come off in, and that you're able to put them back together. That's the reason why you pull the schematic as well. If you ever have any questions, there's a burst diagram there. It's going to show you where all the pieces and parts are. So this is the top of the reel, but I had to take that rotor off in order to get to opening up the main part of the reel. So let's go do that. The next thing you have to do is you have to take the shrouds off here to get to the body, and a quick look, and you kind of start to scratch your head, where's the screws and how do you take it off? Well, the first thing is that there's two small screws hiding under this cap, so you have to kind of use a fingernail or something else to kind of pull that cap out. You'll see it's kind of got two plastic little buttons that sit in some holes. I'll put that rotor up on a big tray. We have two small screws here now, so use that micro driver, get those two screws off, and I let them fall right into the bucket. And that's going to take our adjuster knob off. We're not done there, but it's going to take that off. And then here's the real two small screws, and I mean they are small. So make sure you have a good, sharp, small micro driver. And again, you can just kind of see that on here. It's very small. It's almost the size of an eyeglass screw. You'll see it on the tip there. Just make sure that you don't lose them, because if you lose them, nothing good can come out of that. So I'm going to pull those two out. And actually I need to work on this a little bit. I got to tighten this screwdriver up. I'm losing the throw there to get this one off. There we go. It's coming off. The shroud is coming off with it. That's the shroud. So now we have the two small screws are in the tray and the shroud. Now this next piece is a cover piece that works with the it runs around the side here, up and over and through this. So in order to take this one off, the first thing you need to do is take off the assembly for the bait feeding mode. So there's a screw on that side and two screws on this side. And right back into my parts bucket. As you can see, I put all the small pieces in that tray. Now you need that small screwdriver again to get in there for the third one. I just lost my... having a little trouble with this, holding that bit in place. Every workshop should have one or two or more of these micro drivers. And again, if you're hard pressed to find one, just kind of go to a Harbor Freight or someone. They carry that kind of stuff. Probably an eyeglass store if you really get down to it, or those things that you find in the general merchandise stores. They probably would hold them as well. So we're working on this now. And here's a different variety, but this one's a little bit thicker, and there we go, that one will work. So this is a patience exercise, right? This is not something that's just a quick open it up, take two screws out, lube, and put it back together. So those two came off of these posts. Good to recognize how those posts go. Now we have three side plate screws, but we have a shroud on here, and that's hiding the fourth one. And if you just go to pull or try and pry, that's not going to work. There's a screw that's hiding under here that also needs to be removed in order to get that shroud out. So just be patient on this one, and that's why I said there's actually 4 pieces to servicing the Regal Baitmaster, and one of them happens to be just how do you take it apart, because there's a lot of moving pieces and parts in this one. Okay, that should be okay now. Should be able to slip these through, and there you go. So what I like to do on this one, because I've got a lot of small screws now, I like to take that screw that's holding that one, and I do like to put that one back in here. Okay, and now we're on to the side plate screw. So you could take this side plate off without taking the rotor off, because this cap actually rides under the rotor and you wouldn't be able to pull it apart. So we're going to go do that now. We're going to take a screwdriver. And I know how this plays out, but I always tell folks, when you're doing real repair like this and you're on side plate screws, pull all of the side plate screws out, lay them on your table for a moment, and make sure they're all the same length. And this is going to be the reason why, because one of these screws is not the same length. It's the one that sits under that shroud, but I thought as an example I would just show you that, so we'll take a moment here to do that. So I have 3 of one length and 1 of another. This is the second. This is the third one, same length. So bait feeders are no different than any other reel. It's just a combination of reels. It has both the rear drag and the top drag, and it has a flip mechanism to work between the two. So all you really have to do is know how to service either, or actually service both of them, and both the rear and the top lever drag systems, and you're more than halfway home. This is your short screw, so you want to make a note that it came out of the bottom lower corner, because as you go to reinstall, if you didn't do that, then the longer screw is not going to fit there. Okay, with that done, we can then pull off the side plate. And we just had something come out of it. It's the spring for the bait feeder. So those are always fun, but we have this bait feeder mechanism here, and the bait feeder mechanism rides on the channel, and it rides in this channel, and it's what just pulled this out. So on the bait feeder spring mechanism, we'll get back to that, but that bait feeder mechanism spring just rides in the hole up top here and wraps under this one. So we'll show you that as we go into reassembly. But don't be too scared or concerned if that happens. Just know where those pieces and parts came from. Okay, so now let's concern ourselves with removing the axle. I'm going to put the 4 of these pieces in here. And we're going to remove the axle, and then we're going to service the bottom end of the rear drag system. So we're going to pull the clamp that holds the axle to the crosswind block. This is a little kind of louver door thing going on here, and it rides in 2 grooves. And then this one, I like to put that screw into that little hole. And then I set that into the parts basket there. If I lose it, I lose it between the 2, but at least if I keep it there, I have a sense of where it belongs. Next up then, I'm going to hold that crosswind block, and I'm going to move the axle shaft out. I'm going to put that in my big parts tray. And then with the axle shaft out, I can remove the crosswind block with needle nose pliers. And I can pull the main gear. Now this main gear is kind of fun too. We'll note it a little bit later. Internally here now we have a bearing that came out of the side plate. We have the crosswind gear. I like to take that off and make sure that we have that lubricated underneath. I use a needle nose plier to grab the stud. And then we have the lower drag system. So I'm just going to put these oh, that doesn't belong in that shaft. It belongs on here. There's a little silver bushing that belongs inside the crosswind gear. That goes into the tray, the crosswind block goes into the tray, and now we're down to the mechanism for the rear drag, which contains the 2 drags underneath, and that's the next part of this service. So we've stripped the reel out, and we have the the rear drag system to be serviced. I use a little screwdriver to go in there and push the clamp side out. And this is a spring clip, so keep your fingers on that clip. You'll see that. Put that up into my body parts 1. And then if we grab that cap with that clip out, we back this off so that we can unscrew the retaining nut. So that's what we're doing right now. There's a retaining sleeve in there, and we're rolling that out. That retaining sleeve will have a spring on the end of it, and that's what puts pressure onto the, I don't know if I got that out all the way. That puts pressure onto the drags that are underneath. There we have it. So you notice the sequence of it, and these you can lay right here because we're going to just put this back together again. And then the spring goes in the cap. And then that's the first of the plates. There's a plate up here. So we want to take a needle nose pliers and grab the bottom plate. And pull that out. Remember the orientation on that. And then we can get the rest of the drags out from there. Should be able to get the second plate out as well. There we go. And I apologize if some of this can't be seen on camera, but I'm doing my best to work on this and to show you as we progress. Okay, so I've kind of fished them out, no pun intended. This is what we have. We have a series of the drags with the plate in between. So we have a fabric, a metal, this way, metal, fabric, and they sit on this post. That's the drag collar there. So we're going to go ahead and just clean these. I use a paper towel. And these are Teflon. They don't require any kind of lubrication on that. I'm going to go ahead and put that back in. So one of the fabric washers. I'm going to go load the metal one. And we got the sleeve goes in. And then we got the last of the fabrics. So that's how you service the stack. These were in good condition. If you needed to replace them, you would order replacements. And then you could go back in off of that and do the servicing. Then we take that the screw assembly. This is the one that applies the pressure. And make sure you have it seated properly as it screws in. You want to make sure you have the spring inside the cap as you do this. And you can do it by hand as much as you can until it becomes tough to manipulate. You have that little metal washer that goes there, and you can just tighten this up now. That'll pull all the assembly back in when you hear it start to click. And we grab that spring again, which is going to hold this in. Get that seated, the little washer seated there. washers on the wrong side. This is where pictures help. Okay, we got that in now. Now we can grab that retaining clip. There's a groove that runs around. It's halfway on it. You're going to sit this clip into the groove. Get one side seated first in here, and bring the other side around, then clip that in. Then we can, or we'll leave this until we put the body part on. Okay, so that's essentially this portion of that. We're going to grab the crosswind block now, and we're going to make sure that this is well lubed. You want to get a little bit inside that bushing and a lot on the face. It's going to ride on the bushing there. You want to press that down onto the assembly, and you want to lower that stud to the bottom so that you have clearance when you're doing the main gear. Now we have the main bearing, or the side case bearing. You want to oil that one up. And then what I like to do is I like to go up top and service this so that I can get a full service of the pinion without pieces and parts falling out. So we're going to do this next. We're going to grab the Phillips head screwdriver. We're going to take the two screws off that hold the collars. There's two collars. It's a top and a bottom collar. One is in plastic, one is in metal, so it's not difficult to remember which way they go. I'm going to pull those two out, take the collar off, and then out comes your assembly. So this is an assembly. Like I said, metal is on top, and metal's on the bottom, plastic is on top. There's two studs, and there's a bearing inside here. So we'll pull that off so that we can lube the bearing. Now that's a sealed bearing, but it doesn't hurt to put oil on it anyway. And then that's how this assembly is going to be reset. This is your anti-reverse, so there's a little bit of a bushing and some washers up on top of this. There's a collar and a Teflon bushing below that. This is the anti-reverse stop, and this is the pinion gear. So you want to make sure that the gear is clean. This one's nice and clean, so we're just going to grab some lube and put that in here. Going to oil on the ferrule here. Going to oil the anti-reverse clutch. Reseat that. Two washers, the washer and the Teflon and the metal one go next. Bottom of the collar, a little washer. And again, if you're getting lost along the way, or you put these pieces down, or they exploded, or they did whatever, let's go back and check your schematic. And then we have the top plastic one. Take the plastic one, then we reseat this whole piece into the channel. Grab the two retaining screws, and that's your service under the rotor. You want to make sure that you get that cleaned up in there. You want to make sure that it gets lubricated, and that you reinstall the right way. Okay, so we've done that now. Like I said, this is going to take some time. It's a little bit of a test of patience, but I like to spin it, make sure that everything's working fine along the way. Okay, now we can reinstall, clean up and install. So when you get the main gear, you want to notice that there's a little metal tab that's sitting off this main gear here. This is a real old technology. Before you had really sophisticated anti-reverse tags, you had this one. And this little pin goes in the hole right here. And that's going to move the, you can see the mechanism here, that's going to move that when you back pedal. So you're going to have to line that up. So how do you line that pin with that hole when you got a face like this? Well, the manufacturer gives you a little peek-through hole here, and you're going to move this right now after you've cleaned the back of the gear so that you can see the stud through that little peek hole. Once you did that, check all your teeth on the gear, make sure that they're going well, nothing's chipped or cracked or bent or worn unevenly. And grab some real grease. I use Penn's Precision Reel Grease, but any manufacturer's reel grease will do. Just make sure it's for fishing reels. I'm going to go ahead and put some on the back that drives that crosswind gear as well. I set that down for a moment because I just said crosswind gear. We should have some on the face of the gear. We put it on the back. Enough on the face of the gear to make it work. We've already flooded the bearing, so now we can grab this main gear, look through the hole with that stud, and also you can look over the top right now to make sure you pretty much have it in alignment. And quite honestly, it won't seat if you don't, so don't worry about it too much. There we go. And then you look through that just to make sure that that's correct. With that in place, then we can grab that axle. We want to make sure it's clean. In this case, it's not scarred or anything, so all we want to do is throw a little bit of lubrication on that as well. I use this glove hand as a general applicator as well. I don't want too much in there because as you go to put it back in here, it's only going to clog up. So reseat the axle. Oops, need the crosswind block. Grab the crosswind block, put a little bit of lube in the back end of that. That's the beauty of a parts tray. If I somehow manage to get through that, it wouldn't take long before you realize that the crosswind block was missing. You want to align that then with the hole so that when you bring your axle through, it seats into the hole for the rear wheel drag. So that's the way that's. Okay, and then we just tap down on that spring, and that loads this now so that we have an operational lever that runs up and down. So right now it's up. When you turn the main gear, it's going to trip that. That little lever is going to hit, and it's going to, well, when the side plate's on, it's going to trip it and push it down and force the bait feeder back. So we've got this set properly. And one of the things we're going to want to do here is we're going to want to set that to the up position to put the case back. So I'm just going to grab that quickly, and I'm going to use my screwdriver to do that for now. And now we have the case that goes back on. So what have we done so far? We've lubed the bottom, we've cleaned the drags and washers. We did that by removing this assembly. Then we took the internals. We have one bearing I didn't oil here, so that's a good thing that we started the recap there. We've cleaned the main gear. We've cleaned the internals. We've re-lubed the crosswind block and gear. We took out the pinion assembly and made sure all of those were lubed, and now we're going to put the side plate back on. So this groove here in the side plate is actually going to cover this bar. So you might have a little trouble. We may have a little trouble doing this. Hopefully we don't, but usually if you do, it's because that little thing is having some difficulty getting into that. Okay, so I had to step away for a moment. I mentioned this was going to be a long one, and I needed to get a drink of water to refresh my talking voice here. But I think when we left it with the case snapping on. And now we're going to pull the 4 screws out of the parts tray. And in those parts tray, remember we had the one small one which belongs below. So we'll go ahead and put these screws in. Again, these are set up for Phillips heads or for flat bladed ones. Whatever feels comfortable in your hand. Sometimes one works a little bit better than the other. And once we put these in, we'll give it a test drive, and then we'll put that bottom cap on, put the rotor on, and we'll go up top and we'll service the drags, and that'll be it for how to service this. So these are popular reels. They last a long time if properly serviced. You do have to be patient. I think one of my friends once told me you need a couple of things to be good at reel repair. You need certainly need the knowledge, you need the tools, but more importantly, you need patience, and lastly, a sense of humor. Because as we saw in the first part of this, things can spring, and you just need to be able to work and get your diagram or whatever and take your time and put that spring back together. So this should be functional as soon as we put this last screw in here. And then it's a matter of just addressing the cosmetics. So let's go ahead and grab this handle and poke it through there for a moment. Give it a ride. There we go. And yeah, nice smooth reel. Alright, so let's go ahead and we'll go put the cosmetics back on then. And we're going to start by putting the put the shield on. And this is the one that had that real small sorry, I got to put this one on first. First bezel. Remember, I left this screw in that one. That's the first bezel that goes on. And it slides over. Kind of has an indentation in the top of the one and a footing in the other. Again, I can't emphasize enough with this. Don't force anything. If something isn't going your way, chances are you're probably putting it in the wrong way there. And just reset yourself. Just take the time, have the practice, have the patience to complete the task. If you're trying to do something in a force mode, almost assuredly it's wrong. Okay, then we have that little shield that goes here. And this is where you need to get your micro screwdriver. I have one of the screws is in the case, so we're just going to screw it in that way. This one never came out of the case. We get the snap, and then this other one is the very tiny screw that goes with that one. And they really are small screws. I don't know why they designed it that way, but they did, and that's just the way it goes. Alright, so we tighten those down and we'll have the bezels complete. And again, if you're working on this reel, you absolutely need this micro screwdriver. Alright, so we're set on that. Next up then is the button. And we have the two small screws that go to that. Should be one more there. This is the beauty of a parts tray. You know where to find the small pieces and parts, and more importantly, if there's something left over there, you kind of get to figure that out. Okay, that's working the way it should. Now we've got the bail arm assembly. The fire assembly. So these hook in, and you can go ahead and put the one side in without the other. You don't have to snap it all together. So I like to work on the side that has the single screw first. Once we have that, we can go ahead and put the assembly with the second part. There's a long screw. Take that out at this point. I was holding it there just to, it's kind of a place marker. I'll just go put the bigger screw in at the moment. And we can put that other screw in here. This is the one I believe I used a different micro screwdriver on. It's a little bit bigger than the one I have for the, what I'll call the eyeglass screws. Grab the handle. Now we grab that button that we seem to have a little bit of trouble with there. So I'm going to put a little bit of a oil spray on that. Seems like it's kind of stuck right here with the plastic grommet that sits inside that shaft. So let's just go ahead and see if we can get this back together again. There's one more button there that belongs underneath here. So let's go put that trim ring back on there, so we can hide all the rest of that. Come on over to the rotor assembly, which we previously worked on there. Now there's a couple of things that went there, right? There's a little collar that goes on there. Sits inside like that. Then there was the spring that sat inside of that. And there was the nut cap. Tighten that now. Grab the little guard. And this is interesting. That guard is offset, so make sure the low end is going down. And grab that little set screw. And so that basically puts this reel back together again. We'll give it a spin before we go up top there. But that puts the reel back together again. Like I said, we weren't going to set any world records in timing here, but we were going to get this correct. All right. Only two pieces left are in this bucket then. That's the rotor, click rotor assembly, and the little tension washer that goes on top of that. And now we can move over to the drag. We'll give this a quick spin. Oh, that's a nice smooth reel. Put it in the bait mode. Make sure it clicks back. It's, we've done our job there. So now we just want to go in and clean up the washers underneath. Typical of a top-end drag system, it's got the drag washers sitting on top. So you can put a little pick or a screwdriver or something. Just insert. Hold your hand on that. Here's a different pick here. Hold your hand on the spring because it can fly. Pull that spring out. I'm just going to lay these on the table. These don't require lubrication, but the channels should be clean. These are hard fabric washers. Just going to grab a paper towel to clean out some of the dirt in there. This is the assembly as it came out. All you do is make sure that your washers are clean. So it goes a hard fabric washer, a metal. These are in good condition. Hard fabric. Then the eared washer is always in the middle, or keyed washer. They fit in the slots. Last of the hard washers. Last of the metal washers. Then you want to reseat this. Don't put this into the groove there. Keep it off to the side. Get it set, and then just, it's enough for hand strength to reset it. That's how you service the drags on this one. Load this back in and knock another one off of the list of the reels that Doug gave me. So just tighten that down, make sure that that runs. There we go, we're got that one cooperating. Nice smooth operating reel in bait mode. Back to our locking for our top drag, and that's essentially it. So it's a little bit of a project for sure, but it's not one that you shouldn't be ignoring, and it's not one that you should feel badly about trying to tackle. It's just one that takes a little bit of time and effort to get it completed. So that's it. It's the Daiwa Regal Plus 4000 bait runner, and if you have one of those, now you know how to do it. If you enjoyed the video, please like it. If you want to see more, please subscribe. Thank you for watching. This is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle.